Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I am Dr. Gabriel Velez, and I'm an assistant professor here at Marquette. I'm really excited soon, in just a little over a month, to be able to join you all at the Principals ICG Colleagues Gathering. And I wanted to do this short video beforehand to just give you a little bit of sense of who I am, some of my work, and then what we're going to do for that meeting. And so first, I just wanted to introduce myself. I mentioned my name, I'm here at Marquette. I'm also, by training and background, a teacher, and that's still really a part of my identity. I was a teacher for a number of years at a Nativity Network middle school in Harlem, and then I was a Jesuit volunteer and taught internationally in Peru. And then I was, again, at another school in Colombia, high school there. And so I was working with young people across these different settings, and that really informs my interests and my work and where I sort of come at this as a developmental psychologist, which is my background and training. In Harlem, I remember working with our kids about getting home safe and thinking about issues with gangs. In Peru, there were questions of extreme poverty with the population I worked with. It was very low resource, but then also was a real intimate opportunity to engage with educational communities and the schools and the families. And then in Colombia, I worked at an elite private school in the capital there, where it's just kind of night and day different in terms of the structures and the systems and the infrastructure. But really, it was also kind of this informative experience of kids across settings and struggling with some really similar issues as well. My research focuses on sort of three broad things in relation to adolescent identity development. And I sort of bucket them as kind of peace education and a holistic sort of focus on how young people experience that, what that means for their development, particularly their sort of membership in society. They're thinking about themselves as people who are part of things larger than themselves or even their schools. And then similarly, a lot of work on restorative justice. And there, my kind of focus and interest is on how experiences of restorative justice in schools can inform young people's broader development. So the ways they interact and think outside of the school, or also as they graduate and move on, who they see themselves as, who they see themselves as members of their communities. And then a third bucket of my work is more and more sort of focusing on the college transition and the ways that young people think about that, experience that, and then in particular in relation to COVID-19, I've done a lot of research with adolescents in high school and then now in the kind of that transition to what they're taking with them and what that transition looks like for them in this context that we're living in now of the pandemic and of the last number of years with a few other things going on. And so that's kind of, the broad spectrum of what my work is. This COVID related work has really come out of two things for me. And one is my personal experience. I think often in all these ways I've worked with young people about not necessarily knowing what they're processing and what they're going through, but thinking about just, gosh, like it must be a lot, or what could it be? Like, what could this be like for young people right now? And trying to sort of put myself in their shoes a little bit. And I remember that early on in COVID, when the pandemic first started in March of 2020, and we had the quarantines and a lot of the isolation. And I was thinking, gosh, what does this mean for young people who are going through a developmental stage when finding themselves, when connecting with others is such a key part of that. And so that kind of is what inspired some of that work. And then similarly, my work now in this transition to college has been a bit about sitting here at an institution of higher education at Marquette, having done all this sort of research with these high schoolers during COVID, and thinking about what is this like to them as they try and navigate now this college experience and this transition to college that, in our society is such an important marker and also such a formative one for so many young people. And so that's kind of where I've kind of delved into to trying to think about research that involves young people transitioning here to Marquette, informs my teaching and my work here on campus, but also then really informs, I think, more broadly these questions about education in our current context, and for me kind of rounds out some of the discourses you hear in the media and that are prevalent in what's kind of out there in our pop culture. And that's where I kind of want to set the stage a little bit for what I'm going to talk about is at the meetings, and what I really want to engage us in is, I think, we're constantly in society, there's always kind of these discourses and these ideas and these things that are how we talk about young people. And some of that is, very data based, but then also like what their experience is like, and obviously the diversity in those types of experiences. And so I think, as a developmental researcher, I'm constantly a little bit struggling with these two. And my research, I really try and hear and give voice to young people through it to really say, well, what is it like for them and how are they experiencing it, to both be sort of a check and also to maybe complement these kind of broader discourses. And I think there's been a lot over these last 2 years that really emphasizes the negative. And for a second, I kind of want to put a pin in that and say, like, there have been a lot of challenges, right? Whether it be related to COVID-19, whether it be systemic and structural issues related to racism, which extend much broader and before, let's say, 2020, but have really come to the head in a number of ways recently. There are a lot of political dynamics over these last 2 years, been in some ways an economic roller coaster, and I think there's still ways that it's impacting how we talk about the future, and what young people think about their own futures. But there's been a lot in the discourses, I think, that's focused around that negative part. And to give an example, young people and mental health. And that's one of those places that I want to be so careful in what we're talking about, what we're going to engage with, because the mental health needs are real. There's good data and there's good evidence to show that young people are more and more experiencing higher levels of stress, depression, suicidality, right? And this is something I'm sure a lot of you have experienced in your schools. That's something when I do some of the research I've been doing, connecting with schools, I hear that. When we're talking on campus here, I also hear that. There are a lot more faculty, for instance, who are trying to figure out, how do I navigate when students talk to me about these needs? But then, to kind of add that other element I was talking about before, one of the things I've been finding in some of my research, and I think is an important complement, and we'll dig into this more, is how sometimes young people make meaning of these kind of challenges and experiences in ways that aren't necessarily focused on the negative. And so to give you an example of that, through the pandemic, there have been a lot of young people who have experienced all sorts of new mental health challenges. But there are a lot of stories in the work that I'm doing with these young people that are coming out where they're focusing on the coping, on the resilience, on the lesson out of it. And that's something that, they're taking away with them. And so as they're transitioning to college, they're saying, hey, it was tough. There were times when I couldn't get out of bed. There were times when I felt entirely unmotivated. But I also learned that I need to do X, Y, and Z. Or, they say it was really hard to learn online when I couldn't ask a teacher in person. And I didn't have structure to my day. But then I just, I had to learn that. And I feel like I became more independent. And, it's a little bit hard to piece apart some of the developmental part. So obviously, as you go from 15 to 16 to 17 to 18, and particularly in schools like Jesuit high schools with the formation element, things change. You become more able to take on your own sort of responsibilities, your own structure for, say, your learning. You learn more about yourself and you hopefully engage in reflective experiences. But I do think there's something tied into there to the pandemic. And I think that's something as we think forward, we want to acknowledge and address all that, the challenge and the difficulty and the struggle. But I also think if we sit in that, we sit only with that, we're doing a disservice to ourselves, to young people, and also to what we can build out of that into the future. And that's where I kind of want my engagement with you all at this meeting to really focus on. What can we do with that? What can we sort of take with us? What can we build on? Where can we go forward with this kind of framework of highlighting and thinking about some of the resilience, coping, and other things that the young people are telling me in some of this research I'm doing. And then, I want to learn more about the ways this might be operating and playing out in your school contexts. And so with that, I'll end now, and I'll end with a bit of a call to you all. First here, I just want to kind of highlight, again, I'll be there. I'm excited to be there on November 9th with you all and talk a little bit about this kind of generation COVID-19, and I framed it sort of development, healing, and resilience. We'll do a couple presentations with some data, but really not focused and harping on that past, but rather how can we understand sort of developmentally what's going on in 2020 for 2022 in young people right now, and with all that they've gone through, with this thinking ahead to the future and supporting these positive developmental outcomes. And then I'll also end, and I'm sure in this email that you get with it, you'll also get this information, but really encouraging you to feel free to reach out to me in preparation of the meetings, or to kind of look at some of my work, or engage with me in social media if you want. And so there I've listed my email, my Twitter handle, and then also my webpage where I have some of the work. but I'm really excited to be there with you. I'm excited to share, but also learn from all of you. And I really hope that you take the time to check out anything and share with me how I can make my engagement with you all more productive, more effective, and more supportive for you. Right. Have a great, wonderful rest of your day and see you in Winnipeg.